Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are going to get small.
Very small.
Like radically, uncomfortably, fascinatingly small.
Extremely small. But also, as we found out, surprisingly complex.
We are talking about the tiny house movement. And I have to admit, I have fallen completely down the rabbit hole on this one.
Oh, easy to do.
You know the drill, you're scrolling through Instagram or YouTube, it's maybe 11:00 p.m. And the algorithm just serves you this image.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly curated, sun-drenched cabin in the woods. It's got the reclaimed barnwood siding, the sleeping loft with the skylight right above the pillow.
The steam rising off the pour-over coffee.
Yes, the steam rising off a pour-over coffee sitting on a fold-out table. It looks like the ultimate escape, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It triggers that primal urge to just run away from it all.
Exactly. It screams financial freedom. It screams minimalism. It screams, I have checked out of the rat race and I am now living my best life. It looks like the dream.
The dream.
But as we dug into the stack of research for this deep dive, and it was a massive stack, I started to realize that the gap between the Instagram fantasy and the actual reality is, well, it's huge.
It is a chasm. It's the Grand Canyon of expectations versus reality.
Because for every beautiful shot of a cozy reading nook, there is a very, very complicated backstory.
Right.
It involves zoning laws, sewage disposal, which we are definitely going to get into, and some serious psychological adjustments that I don't think people anticipate.
No, not at all. That's right. What's so fascinating about the tiny house phenomenon is that it's not just an architectural trend.
It's more than that.
Oh, yeah. If you peel back the layers, it's really three distinct things all rolled into one. It's an architectural movement, obviously.
Sure.
But it's also a massive social shift in how we view stuff and success and debt. And thirdly, and maybe most frustratingly for the people actually trying to do it,
It's a legal nightmare.
it is a legal nightmare.
A legal nightmare. I love that phrase for this.
Right.
Then we are going to unpack all of that. But before we start putting walls up, or really, really close together walls, we need to define what we are actually talking about.
Yeah, that's step one.
Because tiny feels incredibly subjective. To me, a studio apartment in Manhattan is tiny. To someone in Texas, a 3-bedroom ranch might feel cramped. Is there a hard number?
It is surprisingly subjective, and that ambiguity is actually where a lot of the legal trouble starts later on. But if you want the Bible definition, I guess, you have to look at the IRC.
Okay, and for the uninitiated, the IRC is what exactly?
That is the International Residential Code. It's the comprehensive set of building rules that most U.S. states, and even many other countries, adopt.
So it's the rule book.
It's a rule book. It tells you how thick your walls need to be, how steep your stairs can be, how much insulation you need. And recently, because this movement got so big, they actually added a specific section, Appendix Q, just to address this.
Appendix Q sounds mysterious, like a James Bond gadget.
It's the holy grail for tiny house builders. And it defines a tiny house as a dwelling that is 400 square feet or less in floor area.
400 square feet. Okay, let's anchor that for the listener. The average American home right now is pushing, what, 2,600 square feet?
Roughly, yeah. So we're talking about roughly 15% of the size of a standard home.
So to visualize that,
Imagine a standard 2-car garage that is usually about 400 square feet.
okay.
Now imagine living your entire life, sleeping, cooking, bathing, working inside that garage.
That puts it in perspective very quickly.
But here is the kicker in the code. That 400 square foot limit,
Yeah.
it excludes lofts.
Wait, why exclude the loft? That's where you sleep. That's usually half the usable space in these things.
Right, but legally, a loft in a tiny house often doesn't meet the definition of a habitable room.
How so?
In a normal house, a bedroom needs a ceiling height of at least 7 feet.
Right, so you can stand up.
So you can stand up. In a tiny house loft, you usually can't stand up. You're crawling. So if they counted the loft floor space toward the total, the ceiling height rules would kick in, and the whole design would be illegal.
Ah.
So the code carves out this very specific niche to make the math work.
So it's a compromise. The code basically says, okay, we'll let you sleep in a crawl space, just don't call it a room.
Precisely.
Uh-huh.
But then you step outside the building code and you look at, say, the dictionary. Merriam-Webster says a tiny house is up to 500 square feet.
Okay, so that's different.
And then you have some architectural firms pushing it to 600.
Yeah.
So the lines are very blurry.
Very blurred. And it gets even messier when you try to categorize what the object actually is. Is it a house?
Is it an RV?
Is it a shed? Is it a park model?
And that confusion over definitions. That is it a building or is it a vehicle? Question. That is the root of almost all the trouble these owners face.
Okay, so our mission today is to sift through all that confusion. We want to find out, are tiny homes a genuine solution to the housing crisis and climate change? Or are they just an overhyped trend that's going to leave people claustrophobic and, well, legally stranded?
That is the question.
Yeah,
And to answer it, we have to look backward before we look forward.
let's do it. Let's talk origins. Because while Instagram might have made this trendy, the idea of living small, it isn't new. Humans lived in small spaces for most of history.
Oh, not at all. If you want the spiritual ancestor of the tiny house, you have to go back to 1845, Henry David Thoreau.
Walden, of course.
Walden. He goes into the woods near Concord, Massachusetts, builds a cabin, and writes about living deliberately. And that philosophical thread that living with less brings you closer to nature and to yourself, that is the DNA of the modern movement.
Right.
He wasn't doing it because he couldn't afford a bigger house. He was doing it to strip away the non-essentials.
But it wasn't just philosophers sitting by a pond, right? There's a more practical history here in the U.S.
Absolutely. Think about the shotgun shacks of the American South. From the late 19th century through the Great Depression, these were the standard for blue-collar families. They were long, narrow houses, maybe 12 feet wide.
And the lore is that you could fire a shotgun through the front door and it would go out the back door without hitting anything.
That's the one, because the rooms were just stacked one after another. No hallway.
Super efficient.
Exactly. Efficient, cheap to build, excellent cross-ventilation. But it's important to note, they weren't trying to be minimalist as a style choice.
No.
They were minimalist out of economic necessity.
Right. Poverty isn't an aesthetic.
No.
Yeah.
Then we jump to the 1970s. This is a pivotal time. You had the counterculture movement, hippies rejecting the suburban dream, and crucially, you had the oil crisis.
Right. People started questioning consumption.
Yes. You had artists like Alan Wexler and pioneers like Lloyd Kahn, who wrote a book called Shelter in 1973. They were investigating compact living, not just to save money, but as an environmental statement. Small is beautiful.
But the modern viral version of this, the tiny house on wheels that we see on TV, that has a specific father figure, doesn't it?
It does. His name is Jay Schaefer.
Okay, let's unpack Jay Schaefer, because this seems to be where the movement shifts from concept to viral product.
It is. So in 1999, Jay Schaefer builds this 110 square foot house in Iowa.
110 square feet. I have to stop you there. That's a large walk-in closet. That's smaller than a parking space.
Essentially, yes. But he made it look like a real house. It had a pitched roof, a cute little porch, nice wood siding. It wasn't a trailer. It was a miniature Victorian cottage.
Okay.
And this is the crucial part. He put it on wheels.
Okay, here's where I need you to explain the logic. Was he planning to travel? Was this a road trip project?
You would think so, right? That's the logical assumption. But no, the wheels weren't for mobility. The wheels were a legal magic trick.
A magic trick. Explain that.
Well, think about it. If you build a structure on a concrete foundation, what are you subject to?
Local building codes, zoning laws, inspections, all that.
Exactly. And local zoning codes almost always have a minimum square footage requirement for a primary dwelling.
Right, to keep property values up.
To keep property values up and prevent overcrowding, towns say you can't build a house smaller than, say, 700 or 1,000 square feet. So if Jay builds his 110 square foot house on a foundation,
The city comes in and condemns it.
immediately, it's an illegal structure.
Yeah.
But if you put it on wheels,
It's not a building anymore.
correct. It falls out of the jurisdiction of the building department and into the jurisdiction of the Department of Transportation. It becomes cargo or a vehicle.
That is deviously clever.
It's brilliant. He essentially hacked the housing code by turning his house into a trailer. And that specific decision wheels over foundation is what defined the aesthetic of the entire movement for the next 20 years.
He founded the Tumbleweed Tiny House Company based on this.
He did. If you've seen a tiny house, you've probably seen a tumbleweed design or something inspired by it.
But I read in the notes that there was some drama there.
There's always drama in startup stories. Jay actually left Tumbleweed in 2012, founded a new company, and then ended up being sued by the company he founded.
Ouch.
Yeah, a classic business tragedy, but it didn't stop the movement. He already lit the fuse.
Now, alongside Jay, there was Sarah Susanka, right? With the not-so-big house.
Yes, though she was doing something slightly different. She wrote that back in 1997. She wasn't advocating for 100 square feet.
Not that extreme.
No. She was advocating for quality over quantity. She was saying, why build a massive house with a formal dining room you never use? Build a smaller, better-designed house with nicer finishes. She's sort of provided the intellectual cover for downsizing.
Okay, so we have the philosophy from Thoreau, we have the pioneers like Schaefer and Susanka, we have the legal loophole. But what was the gasoline on the fire? What took this from a niche hobby to a global phenomenon?
The Great Recession, 2007 to 2009.
It always comes back to the economy.
It has to. Think about the psychology of that moment. The housing bubble burst. Millions of people face foreclosure. The Vic Mansion, that big, sprawling suburban house, suddenly stopped looking like the American dream. It started looking like a symbol of excess, debt, and financial ruin.
And suddenly a house that you could buy for $30,000 cash, that had almost no utility bills, didn't look like a sacrifice.
It looked like a lifeboat.
Exactly.
Affordability and environmentalism converged. People wanted out of the mortgage trap. They wanted to own their lives again. But, and I have to temper the enthusiasm here with a stat check.
Okay, hit me with the numbers.
Despite all the buzz, all the TV shows like Tiny House Nation, tiny homes represented only about 1% of real estate transactions at the time.
So, loud on the internet, quiet in the actual market.
Precisely. It's a very visible 1%.
Okay, let's unpack the actual experience of living in one of these. Let's get into the design and engineering, because living in a box requires some serious Tetris skills.
It really does.
This isn't just building a house, it's engineering a machine for living.
It is. You are typically working with 100 to 400 square feet. And if you are mobile, if you are on a trailer, you are constrained by the Department of Transportation rules. You are building a house that has to survive hurricane-force winds every time you drive down the highway at 60 miles per hour.
That's a good point. A normal house just sits there. This one has to endure an earthquake every time it moves.
Exactly. And you generally can't be wider than 8.5 feet without getting a special wide load permit. You can't be taller than 13.5 feet.
Why 13.5 feet? Is that an arbitrary number?
Bridges, overpasses.
Ah, of course.
The standard clearance for highway overpasses in the U.S. is often around 14 to 16 feet, but older bridges can be lower. 13.5 feet is the safe zone. If you build it 14 feet tall, you're going to turn your house into a convertible the first time you go under a low bridge.
Not ideal for resale value.
Not at all. So that height limit creates a massive design challenge, especially for the lofts we talked about earlier.
Right. If the trailer deck is, say, 2 or 3 feet off the ground, and the roof is at 13.5 feet, you have about 10 feet of vertical space to work with total.
Exactly. So if you want a 7-foot ceiling in the kitchen so you don't hit your head when you're making coffee,
you're left with about 3 feet for the bedroom loft upstairs.
that's it.
I've seen videos of people trying to get dressed in those lofts. It looks like a yoga workout gone wrong. You're putting your pants on while lying flat on your back.
It's not for the claustrophobic. But the trade-off, and this is what draws people in, is the energy efficiency. This is one of the strongest arguments for the movement.
The grid defection.
Right. Utilities are actually kind of terrified of this. Tiny homes threaten what they call grid defection because they use so little power that it barely makes sense to hook them up.
What are the numbers on that?
Let's look at them. An average American house uses about 12,700 kilowatt hours per year. That produces about 16,000 pounds of CO2.
Okay. And a tiny house?
Around 900 kilowatt hours per year, producing maybe 1,100 pounds of CO2. It's a massive reduction. You are using less than 10% of the energy of a normal home.
That is staggering.
And because the roof is small, but the energy demand is so low, you can often power the entire house with just a few solar panels.
So you can actually go fully off-grid.
You can. You don't need a massive solar farm. You just need a few panels and a good battery system.
Though the battery math gets tricky, doesn't it? It forces the homeowner to become an amateur electrical engineer.
It does.
Yeah.
You have to calculate days of autonomy. If it's cloudy for 4 days in a row in Seattle, can you keep the fridge running? You need to understand discharge rates.
Right.
You become intimately aware of every single watt you consume. You stop leaving lights on because you know exactly how much battery percentage that light bulb costs you.
Speaking of becoming intimately aware of things, we have to talk about the toilets.
The toilet talk. It is unavoidable in the tiny house world. It's the first question everyone asks.
If you aren't hooked up to a sewer system and you aren't hooked up to a septic tank, where does it all go?
Well, the answers range from extremely high-tech to basically a bucket. But none of them are flush and forget.
Let's start with the high-tech option. I read about these incinerator toilets.
Yes. These are fascinating, if little intense, pieces of engineering.
It sounds terrifying, like a jet engine in your bathroom.
It's actually quite civilized, though it can be loud. You do your business, you close the lid, and you press a button. Then the toilet uses electricity, or propane gas, to heat the inner chamber to about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
1,000 degrees inside the house.
Inside a very well-insulated chamber, yes.
Yeah.
It boils off the liquid immediately and burns the solids until there's literally nothing left but a tiny amount of sterile white ash.
So you basically fire blast your own waste into nothing.
Essentially, it's sterile. You can dump the ash in your garden, but they're expensive, thousands of dollars, and they use a lot of energy.
There's the catch.
If you are off-grid, firing up a 1,000-degree heater every time you use the bathroom is going to kill your batteries.
So what's the more common, low-tech, eco-friendly route?
The composting toilet. This is what most people use. It separates liquids from solids. The liquids go into a jug that you have to dump elsewhere. The solids go into a bin and are covered with sawdust or cocoa core.
So you are literally keeping a bucket of decomposing human waste inside your 200-square-foot box.
If managed correctly, with a fan to vent it outside, it doesn't smell. It smells like earth or mulch.
If. That is a very heavy if.
It is, but this is part of the philosophy. You are taking responsibility for your own waste, rather than flushing it away for someone else to deal with. And it reduces water usage significantly.
It's true. A standard flush toilet uses gallons of water. A compost toilet uses 0.
Precisely.
Now, before we get too bogged down in the plumbing, I wanted to touch on the superlative section of our research. Because humans being humans, people have tried to see how low they can go.
Oh, it's a race to the bottom. It gets absurd.
I found this story about a Boston artist, Jeff Smith. He built a house that was 25 square feet.
25 square feet. That's a 5-foot by 5-foot box. That is smaller than a standard prison cell.
He did it as a mockumentary project, but he actually listed it on Airbnb. It had a sink, a stove, and a hole in the floor for waste.
That's pushing the definition of house to its absolute breaking point.
And then there's Levi Kelly, a YouTuber who built what he calls the tiniest tiny home recently, 19.4 square feet.
Wow.
And somehow he fit an air conditioner, a sink, and a seating area in there.
At that point, you aren't living in a house, you're wearing it. It's an exoskeleton.
It reminds me of the smallest house in Great Britain. It's a tourist attraction now, but authorities eventually ruled it uninhabitable because you couldn't stand up in it.
Which brings us to the biggest hurdle, the authorities. Because you can build the cutest, most energy-efficient, solar-powered tiny house in the world.
But if you can't park it legally...
You have a very expensive lawn ornament.
This is segment 3, the legal maze. Where do I park this thing?
This is the core conflict. Most zoning laws in the U.S. and Canada are built around the idea of protecting property values and safety. And they do that by setting minimum square footage requirements.
So a town might say, you can't build a house smaller than 1,000 square feet, or something like that.
Exactly. They do this to prevent shanty towns or overcrowding. So you can't build a tiny house on a foundation in many places. So as we discussed, people put them on wheels to evade the building code.
But then you run into the camping problem.
Correct. If it's on wheels, the law sees it as a vehicle, usually an RV. And in most residential zones, you are not allowed to camp in an RV on private land for more than, say, 30 days a year.
So let me get this straight. Even if I buy a plot of land, I own the dirt, I pay the taxes, if I put my tiny house on wheels on it, I'm breaking the law if I sleep there.
In many jurisdictions, yes. You are illegally camping on your own property. You can park it there, you can store it there, but the moment you start living in it, you are violating zoning ordinances.
That is maddening.
It gets worse. You might think, okay, I'll just go to an RV park. Makes sense, right?
Seems logical.
But the RV industry, the RVIA, which is the Recreational Vehicle Industry Association, doesn't want anything to do with tiny houses.
Why? They seem so similar. It's a house on wheels.
It's all about liability and standards. The RVIA represents a multi-billion-dollar industry of Winnebagos and Airstreams. Those vehicles are built to specific safety standards for temporary recreational use. They are light. They are often, frankly, quite flammable.
Okay.
Tiny houses are heavy, often DIY projects, often built by people watching YouTube tutorials.
So the RVIA is afraid that if a homemade tiny house catches fire in an RV park.
Exactly. If a tiny house burns down or falls apart, the government might come in and regulate the entire RV industry more strictly. So the RVIA lobbies hard to distinguish RVs from tiny houses. They often ban tiny houses from RV parks unless they are built by a certified manufacturer.
So you can't park on your own land, and you might not be able to park in an RV park. Where do you go?
You live in the gray area, you hide, you park in a friend's backyard behind a tall fence, and you hope the neighbors don't complain.
You become a housing fugitive.
Basically. But there are some bright spots. The law is slowly, very slowly catching up.
Okay, let's hear some good news. I need some.
Spur, Texas. In 2014, they declared themselves the first tiny house-friendly town. They were losing population, they had empty lots, and they said, come on down.
But there was a catch.
There's always a catch. Yeah. They clarified that the houses had to be on foundations. They didn't want the transient wheeled lifestyle. They wanted permanent residents who would pay taxes and send kids to school. So you had to take the wheels off.
And Washington County, Utah revised their zoning too.
Yes. And there have been some court victories. A really fascinating case in New Jersey, League of South Jersey, Inc. v. Township of Berlin. The court struck down size-based zoning because the judge essentially asked, how does demanding a big house protect the public health and safety?
That makes perfect sense. A small house isn't inherently dangerous just because it's small?
No. But the irony remains. In most of America, you can buy the materials at Home Depot, you can build a house perfectly, but you, strictly speaking, cannot legally live in it.
So if I'm hearing you right, in America, we have this paradox. We have the technology to build these homes. We have the desire to live in them.
Right.
But our legal system is essentially stuck in the 1950s, viewing anything small as substandard.
That is the perfect summary. We have an innovation that the law simply cannot categorize.
Is this just us? I feel like Americans are particularly obsessed with bigger is better. Are other countries figuring this out, or is the tiny house versus the law battle happening everywhere?
It is a global headache, for sure, but the symptoms vary by country. If you look at Australia, for example, they are embracing the lifestyle, they have a massive outdoor culture, but they've run into a completely different engineering wall.
What's happening down under?
Well, they don't have the same zoning panic we do, but they have a very strict road authority. In Australia, to tow a trailer with a standard Land Cruiser or a pickup truck, the trailer generally has to be under 4.5 tons. That's roughly 10,000 pounds.
Okay, that sounds like a lot.
It sounds like a lot, but tiny houses are heavy. People want stone countertops, they want tile showers, they want double pane glass. So builders, and specifically there was a controversy with a company called Designer Eco Tiny Homes, were allegedly building homes that were way over the weight limit.
And just not telling the customers.
Or fudging the numbers. So you have customers buying these homes, driving down the highway, and they are technically driving an illegal overweight load. If they get into an accident, their insurance is void. It's a weight scandal.
That's terrifying. What about New Zealand? I've seen that YouTube channel, Living Big in a Tiny House. Bryce Langston, he's huge.
He's probably done more than anyone to popularize the movement globally. But legally, they are fighting the exact same battles. There was a landmark court case there, Dahl v. NIMBY.
Okay.
A guy named Alan Dahl built a tiny house on wheels. The local council said, that's a building, and it doesn't meet building code. Dahl said, no, it's a vehicle with wheels.
The classic argument.
Yeah, the classic argument. He took it to court, and the court actually ruled in his favor. They said it was not a building under the Building Act.
That sounds like a big win.
It was a win for him, but it created chaos for the local councils. Because now they don't know if they have the authority to inspect them or not. If it's not a building, can the council check if the wiring is safe? Nobody knows. It's a regulatory limbo.
And then we have the cautionary tale to end all cautionary tales.
Oh, wait.
The Scandinavian scandal. This story blew my mind.
Oh, the Stetsons in the woods story. This is heavy. It's a perfect example of what happens when idealism meets the hard, cold reality of infrastructure.
Set the scene for us.
So you have a Danish chef couple, very charismatic, very good on Instagram. They launch a Kickstarter for a forest-to-table retreat in the woods of Sweden.
Sounds dreamy. I'm in.
It was called Stetsons. They built these beautiful A-frame cabins. They had a permaculture farm, high-end dining under the stars. It was the ultimate tiny living fantasy. Influencers flopped there, and then the system started to fail. In 2025, the company was declared bankrupt. The owners reportedly fled the country to Guatemala.
Fled to Guatemala. That is a plot twist.
Leaving behind millions in debt to the Swedish tax authorities. But the gross part, the part that really highlights the unsexy side of tiny living, is what they left behind in those woods.
I'm afraid to ask. They
left behind animals that needed care, but they also left behind 158 barrels of human excrement.
158 barrels.
And investigators found wastewater just flowing directly into the forest floor.
Oh my God.
This is the dark side of off-grid. When you disconnect from the sewer system, you become the sewage treatment plant. And if you scale up, if you have hundreds of guests using compost toilets and you don't manage it perfectly, You were just creating a biohazard.
That is a stark reminder that the green requires plumbing. You can't just wish away the waste.
Indeed. Idealization versus infrastructure. Infrastructure usually wins.
So we've covered the hipsters, the dreamers, and the tax fugitives. But there is a much more serious side to the tiny house movement. This brings us to segment 5, from lifestyle to lifeline.
This is the most significant evolution of the movement in the last decade. We've seen a shift from sort of yuppie downsizing to humanitarian aid.
We talked about the recession earlier. Tent cities started popping up everywhere in 2008, 2009, and some of those evolved into tiny house villages.
Exactly. It started informally. Activists started building simple wooden huts for people sleeping in tents, just to get them off the mud, out of the rain. But then cities began to realize that a wooden structure with a locking door is infinitely better than a tent.
So you start seeing official projects.
You see places like Othello Village in Seattle, or Camp Safe in Reno, which uses these Mod Pods, or Social Bite Village in Edinburgh, Scotland.
And the data on this is surprisingly strong. We aren't just guessing that it works. We have actual numbers from San Jose.
This is the crucial argument. In San Jose, in the Bay Area, they compared the outcomes of traditional dormitory shelters versus tiny hard villages. Now remember, a traditional shelter is usually a cot in a gymnasium.
Right. Zero privacy. Very chaotic.
You have zero privacy, zero security. What did they find?
What did they find?
The dormitory shelters led to permanent housing, meaning the person actually got back on their feet and moved into their own apartment less than 15% of the time.
That's a very low success rate. Depressingly low.
It is. It's a revolving door. But the tiny home communities,
Yeah.
they led to permanent housing almost 50% of the time.
Wow. So living in a tiny home tripled the success rate. Why? What is the mechanism there?
It's psychological. It's about agency and dignity. If you are in a shelter with 100 other people, you are constantly stressed. You are watching your backpack so it doesn't get stolen. You aren't sleeping well because of the noise. You are in survival mode.
Right. You can't plan for the future when you're just trying to get through the night.
Exactly. A tiny home gives you a key, a lock on the door. It gives you a base. It reduces your cortisol levels. It gives you the mental space to apply for jobs, to make phone calls, to heal. It treats you like a human being, not a number.
But the critics will point to the cost. It's not cheap.
It is more expensive up front. A shelter bed might cost $17,000 a year to operate. A tiny home spot with an en-suite bathroom in San Jose costs about $34,000 a year.
So it's double the cost. That's a hard sell to a city council.
But if the outcome is 3 times better, isn't that a better investment? If you spend half the money but get bad results, you're just burning cash year after year.
That's the penny wise, pound foolish argument.
Precisely.
Yeah.
However, it's not without criticism. We have to talk about the NIMBYism.
Not in my backyard.
Residents often fight these villages tooth and nail. They fear property values will drop. They fear shanty towns.
And there's criticism from the left too, right? It's not just homeowners.
Yes, some advocates argue that these tiny home villages are carceral.
Meaning like a prison.
Sort of. They are often placed on the outskirts of the city, in industrial zones, far from services or jobs. The argument is that we're just pushing the homeless out of sight, putting them in sheds, and calling it a solution so we don't have to build real, permanent, affordable housing.
The shed accusation. I saw that some of these units don't even have bathrooms inside.
Right. Some, like the cabins in Oakland, are basically garden sheds. Insulated, yes, but no plumbing. You have to walk to a communal portable toilet. Is that housing? Or is it just a better tent? It raises serious human rights questions about what we consider adequate living standards for the poor versus the rich.
It's complex, but that 50% success rate is really hard to ignore.
It is. It proves that the model can work if it's resourced correctly.
Let's pivot to the final segment, the psychology of small spaces. Why do people choose this, really, beyond the money? Because even if you save a ton of money, living in 200 square feet is hard.
It is. I think it comes down to a desire for adventure and a rejection of materialism. When you live in 200 square feet, you cannot go to Costco. You cannot buy things on a whim.
You are forced to own less because physics demands it. If you buy a new pair of shoes, an old pair has to leave.
And for many people, that purge is incredibly liberating. It forces you outside. You don't hang out in your living room because your living room is also your kitchen and your hallway.
Right.
You hang out on your porch or in the park. You connect with nature because you are practically sleeping in it. You're also so much more aware of your resource consumption.
Your water, your power.
Every drop of water, every watt of power. You understand it intimately.
But there's a downside. The teeny house, big lie, as one article called it.
The romance wears off. Humans need personal space. Overcrowding is a real health issue. Studies show it can harm physical and mental health.
If you are a couple and you have an argument in a 200 square foot box, where do you go?
The bathroom. If you have a door, there is no escape. You are constantly in each other's biofield. And for children, a lack of privacy can impact academic performance.
And then there's the issue of depreciation. We touched on this, but it's worth repeating.
This is the financial trap. A normal house usually appreciates in value because the land underneath it gets more valuable.
Build equity.
You build equity. A tiny house on wheels. It's a vehicle. It depreciates like a used car. It loses value every year. You aren't building equity. You are consuming a product.
So after all this, the history, the legal battles, the poop barrels, the homeless solutions, what is the verdict? Is the tiny house movement viable?
I think the conclusion is that it is a niche solution, not a mass market one.
Okay.
It serves specific groups incredibly well. The elderly think granny flats or ADUs in the backyard. It serves the environmentally conscious, single person or couple. And it is a powerful transitional tool for the homeless.
But for the average family of four?
Probably not. The zoning and the space constraints just make it too difficult for the mainstream. We aren't going to see the suburbs replaced by tiny villages anytime soon.
It's a tool in the toolbox, but it's not the whole toolbox.
Exactly.
All right, let's wrap this up with our key takeaways.
Okay. 1. The movement was born of recession and philosophy. It's Thoreau meets the financial crisis.
2. It works technically. We can build amazing small spaces, but it often fails legally because our zoning laws are outdated.
And 3. It's proving to be a potent, if imperfect, lifeline for the homeless crisis, with real data to back it up.
And I want to leave the listener with a thought I had while reading about all these legal battles. We talked about the spatialization of stigma.
Yes, that's a powerful concept.
Our society values large homes. We see square footage as a sign of worth. If you have a big house, you are successful. If you have a tiny house, you are camping or unstable or less than.
Right. It's a status symbol.
So by shrinking our homes, are we just saving money, or are we fundamentally challenging the social contract of what it means to be a successful human being? And if the law refuses to adapt to these smaller footprints, what does that say about who our cities are actually built for? Are they built for people, or are they built for property values?
That is the question. If we can't make space for the small, what does that say about our capacity for change?
Something to think about next time you see that cozy cabin on Instagram. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. See you next time.